Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to The Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Well, kia ora i te whānau and welcome into The Hoon. I'm Bernard Hickey, co-host of The Hoon. Remember, The Hoon is the collective noun for the kaka. And I'm trying to pronounce the kaka correctly because I've been pulled up on it. My macrons are not nearly as good as they should be. Although I have learned to change my keyboard to the Māori version of the keyboard, which is excellent. That saved me a lot of drama with macrons. Peter Bale will join us shortly. He's just closing up shop at the bookshop that he is minding at the moment. We've got some great guests and some good chat about life, the universe, the world news and everything this week. We've got Catherine Dyer to start with to talk about the climate and what we're doing about it or not doing about it. We'll also talk to Robert Patman from the University of Otago about the world, the universe and everything. Well, at least Gaza and Ukraine. And boy, it's been a tough story out of Gaza, but one that's very much at the front of the political headlines here in Aotearoa. And certainly there's plenty going on there. And then we talked to Steph Honey, who is a former trade diplomat for MFAT, now a trade expert, regular commentator and researcher on trade. She'll be coming to talk to us in the second half of the show. And we look forward to a good hour of chat. And Peter, welcome into The Hoon. Great to see you.
Yes, hello, Bernard. I'm moonlighting. I'm moonlighting again. I'm in the bookshop.
Yeah, and no doubt you'll have some good book recommendations.
Somebody, in fact, believe it or not, a friend of mine came in at 4:59 and demanded that I, well, not demand. It was very. I had to sell her a book, which was great, and I sold her Joe Nesbo's new book. If you know Joe Nesbo, who's the Norwegian crime mystery writer, the new book is called Wolf Hour, and if anybody who's in wants to stop by the novel bookshop in Jervois Road and buy a copy from me or anything else, they're welcome.
Yes, I've got to get into the Scandi Noir, and
it's
I can watch the series.
He's the leader of Scandi Noir, but it was just that a classic thing of just being, as I was pushing the dog out of the door and closing the door, my friend popped in and said, "I need a book for my dad." Quickly, anyway. Bernard, have you been? How far did you? I heard you winged it a little bit towards what we've got coming up on the show. Correct?
Yes, I'm always winging it. I've done quite a nice introduction actually. Everyone knows what's coming up.
Always.
Yeah,
and yes, I heard that. And have you discussed some of the? I mean, because the helpful thing, of course, was I sent you a script. Have you done the things on the top of the script?
Yeah, we are going to talk about
the world economy,
the economy in Gaza, and also what's happening with trade. So I'm really looking forward to that, and also previewed what we're going to hear about from Catherine Dyer, and looking forward to a chat with Robert Patman because there's so much happening in the world in the last week and in the coming week, and it's all incredibly relevant. And
Robert and I are going to give everybody a history lesson about Yalta, the Yalta conference between Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill, which divided up the world. So we'll do that. And Bernard, I wanted to raise not necessarily in a soliloquy, but I found the reaction to and the coverage of the assassination of 5 Al Jazeera journalists in Gaza this week, literally in their tent office outside the hospital, to be shocking, but no less shocking than many of the things we've seen. I think it takes to 245 the number of media workers and journalists killed in Gaza. And of course, Al Jazeera is such an interesting kind of, what I find profoundly concerning is even some people that I sort of respect and care about, who are very strong, understandably, on the Israeli lobby, spread all this sort of stuff about both Al Jazeera. There are issues to some extent with Al Jazeera Arabic. It is, Qatar is the home of, it's where Hamas hangs out. It's where the Taliban hangs out. The Qatari government is affiliated, or at least influential in the Muslim Brotherhood. But the English language product of Al Jazeera is exceptional. And I was thinking and remembering, I think it was Colin Powell, the US Secretary of State, years and years ago. I think it was around the time of the first invasion of Iraq, or the Kuwait, the invasion of Kuwait. He was saying how important Al Jazeera was as a source of kind of independent news from the region and by the region. And I find this kind of whataboutism about, so there's a picture of this guy, the main guy who was killed, with Yahya Sinwar. I'm sure we could probably find a picture of Jim Acosta from CNN with Donald Trump. These people are from Gaza. They will have affiliations to other people. They will have friendships and relationships. It's really sick, in my opinion, to be going down this path, as in fact the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, in trying to make a connection and really a justification for having deliberately targeted and murdered these journalists. It makes me feel rather ill. And I haven't seen anything to back it up yet. And actually, one of the most interesting things, I know we'll go to Catherine in a minute, was the Israeli producer of the joint Israeli-Palestinian film No Other Land came out and pointed out that he believed the IDF had a targeted program of attacking specific journalists and also building dossiers on them that could be deployed once they'd killed them to besmirch their reputation. So I don't know, just these there's more still coming out about individual children who aren't in fact starving, or whether they're starving. It's very bleak. And so I do wonder, I was interested, and we'll talk to Robert about this, the Luxon comment about Netanyahu having, quote, lost the plot was not the most diplomatic or intelligent comment, but this whole idea of going in and now occupying Gaza City is just setting us up for more diabolical horror, it seems to me.
It must have been one of the more authentic things we've heard from Christopher Luxon, and it's interesting. It seems to have pierced the armor of the Israelis to encourage, I think, a junior foreign affairs minister to criticize New Zealand and talk about how New Zealand doesn't know what it's like to be under attack, and the only threat we have is from possums and cats, which is
true. Which is true. Oh, that they should have that opportunity. But it's I don't know. That's just pathetic too. I also wonder. I don't know. I saw something about this on TVNZ the other day, and they went to the New Zealand Jewish Council for a comment, and they didn't get one in the end. They didn't have some, because it's not a Jewish question; it's an Israeli question. And I don't think we should always be going to sort of those kinds of organizations necessarily when it's actually an Israeli IDF thing. It's I feel very uncomfortable about combining those two questions. Now, but we've got Dr. Dyer in the green room. Shall we go to there and splice in the cultural things we were going to do at the end, perhaps?
Yes, that would be great, because you're right. We've got plenty on today, and it would be good to get cracking on the climate stuff nice and early. Catherine, welcome into the Hoon. Lovely to see you.
Kia ora, nice to see you too.
Yeah, no, I'm loving your background. Loving your background light there. That looks great.
Mysterious.
Yeah. There's been plenty of news around the climate in the last week or so here in Aotearoa, in particular this idea that the government is doing some things which on the face of it could be quite good for reducing transport emissions. We've got the government doing a once in 50-year change away from fuel levies to pay for roads to road user charges, which, in theory, could, put a price on how many kilometers people drive and, in theory, reduce it. And we've also got the government pushing ahead with the Auckland Council on a congestion charging scheme, which, have been very successful in London and various other places, potentially again looking to reduce some of the emissions that get belched out while people are sitting in traffic, and encouraging people to get out of their cars and into buses and trains and stuff. But what did you make of the current versions of what we've seen from the government on road user charges and congestion charges?
I guess, I mean, the first thing that occurs to me on the road user charge front, one of the narratives that they've used is to say that it is not fair for people who drive less and can't afford a more fuel efficient car. So, you know, and I'm kind of thinking while we're talking about fairness, you know, the road user charges specifically for road maintenance and upkeep here. So it's not so much for building new roads, it's for maintaining the roads we've got. And 99% of the damage to the roads we've got is done by heavy vehicles. It's done by freight trucks. I don't know the figures for New Zealand because it's a little bit hard to separate them out, but in the US, where the numbers are that the heavy freight trucks do 99% of the damage and pay about 35% of the road upkeep costs. So if we want to be fair, why don't we just charge it all to them? Yeah. And maybe the 3.5 million light vehicle users can chip in 10 cents or $1 or something. Yeah. And then the effect of that would be it would make coastal shipping and rail transport much more competitive and maybe get these things off the road altogether. And then our costs for road maintenance would shrink to 1% of what they currently are. So that seems like a pretty good idea to me. So I'm not sure about their claim about it being more fair. And then with the congestion charge, that one is the devil's all in the details, right? So some of the more deeper looks into how that's being set up. At the moment, the plan is to potentially put it on just on major motorways, for instance. And where congestion charges have really worked in other countries, they've basically put a ring around the city, and there is a congestion charge for going within that ring rather than just on major roads. If you just put it on major roads,
it's just road price. It's a difference between a toll or road pricing and actually trying to relieve congestion.
Right. So what will happen is some cars will go off those main roads and rat run through the suburbs, which is going to use even more fuel. So they won't be reducing the amount of air pollution or fuel consumption. They'll just be pushing it out onto the regular side roads, which will make cycling more difficult for a start for children and for everybody else who wants to ride a bike to get anywhere. And it just becomes, you know, and if you don't invest more, you know, usually in those places, they've taken the money that they've made from the congestion charge and put it into public transport. There's no plan to do that here. And so we have a situation where a lot of people drive their car because they don't have a good alternative. And if you're not going to
public transport is also, it's not, maybe when the Central Rail Link City Rail Link is kind of done, there'll be some gain there, but there just isn't enough public transport to make it a good option for many people. Yeah,
that's right. And it just means it's a tax for people. It's an extra tax. So while we're on the subject of equity, that's going to clear the roads for the people who can afford to pay, and everybody else just has a worse deal. So I think the big question we should be asking here is not so much which problems they're trying to solve, but whose problems are they trying to solve? Because it doesn't seem to me like they're trying to solve the problems of you and I. It seems to me like they're trying to solve the problems of the guy who's driving a Range Rover or a Porsche four-wheel drive to his very important meeting in the city and wants to get there without the rest of us getting in the way.
Or if you're being really cynical about it. If you're being really cynical about it, it's the Ford Ranger driver they're really going for.
I was listening to last week's episode and you attacked them then too.
And they deserve it.
It's New Zealand's most popular vehicle. You're closing our audience down.
Well, you are right. It's the most popular vehicle, number 2 being the Toyota Hilux. And that's because it appeals to something in a whole bunch of New Zealanders about, you know, I'm a free man, I've got a very large mud guard, and I can go to the beach with my friends and family to drive to sail the boat whenever I want. And it's a really good car to park in the car park at work and no one's going to mess with me. but they are gas guzzlers. Now, even the new ones use a lot of fuel. They are very heavy. They do damage to the road. And from a political point of view, though, if you want to appeal to someone, appeal to the group of people who are the most popular buyers of cars. And this is what I fear here, that this is really all
the
about,
buyers of the most popular car. Yeah.
Yeah. This is really about appealing to Ford Ranger man and to getting those roads clear for more Ford Rangers. For those people who are hammering around in Mazda Demios, they're not going to benefit from this. And for those people who are forced into either rat running or using the bus, there's no suggestion this money's going to be used to beef up the buses or have more trains on the system. And also, you're right. One of the biggest congratulators of Chris Bishop when he announced the road user charges was the road freight industry. So they think they're going to get a good deal out of this.
No doubt.
And
well,
there's also the huge
Can I ask both of you a question though, Catherine?
Yeah.
May I ask you both a question though, because and also I'm very nearly going to tell a couple of our audience to get off their high horses as well, or unless they're just gently winding me up about suggesting that I don't take public transport, which amazingly I do, and I actually recommend the Auckland Transport app constantly. I sent Bernard a note that ACT put out about an advertisement saying, dear boaties, we've given you, you're not going to have to pay fuel tax in the future, fill your boots and go and get your outboards out. And I just thought it was so primitive. And where do we go now with carbon? I mean, ready to have an intelligent discussion about road user charges and the collection of them and so on. Although what's also amusing about that is the hard right in New Zealand saying this is COVID all over again in the surveillance state. But to sort of say, dear boaties in Auckland, you're going to be able to get a bigger outboard or not spend so much on your outboard. What are we doing about our carbon, the cost of carbon?
I think,
again, the use of fossil fuels.
I would come back to who is this, who are they doing policy for? And you can say that about all policy making, I guess, in that every time you intervene in the market or in society with a policy, there's going to be some winners and there's going to be some losers. So it's a redistributive thing. You always, whenever you make policy, you always redistributing benefits and losses. So it's always a good thing to look at is who benefits from these rules and who's losing from them. And it's getting a little bit repetitive at the moment about who's winning in all of these.
And we're seeing more repeated calls from not just ACT but also New Zealand First to pull out of Paris, to abandon any suggestion of any policy that might reduce emissions, to actively go to increase emissions with coal and gas. And it's as if the anti-woke button can be pushed again and again and again on anything remotely that sounds like a green or climate policy, and you get an easy hit, an easy dopamine zhoosh to our cortexes whenever this comes up. And it's really cynical, and it's I think short-termist, apart from anything else, these people are going to die at some point. And the other thing is
they're going to take us all out with their pollution.
Yeah, it's actually not what voters really care about at the moment. And one of the interesting things this week, we got a poll from Taxpayers Union Curia and also one from One News Varian showing that National Party supporting voters and New Zealand First Party supporting voters are very unhappy with the government's performance on costs of living and also the economy. So not enough jobs and butter's too expensive. And the happiest group of people with the government right now are ACT voters, are old men voters, and the unhappiest voters are young people, women, and people who are poorer. And the government runs the risk here of just cementing in an ACT base and teeing up votes for New Zealand First, and not only undermining themselves, but not even addressing the floating voter.
Do you mean by playing the cultural war aspect, Bernard,
Yeah.
or going into climate denialism?
Yeah, I mean, Christopher Luxon is being monstered every day by the tail that wags the dog, and it's showing through in the polls. This week we got polls showing that he not only is the only just as popular as the opposition leader, which is pretty much unheard of for a sitting prime minister, but he's the least popular new prime minister since Jim Bolger in the early 1990s, who in his first term was also almost taken down by a radical budget cutting, anti-poor people finance minister in government. He got rid of that finance minister immediately after the election and pivoted somewhat to the centre. And that will be the question for Christopher Luxon, if he does last through to the election, whether he starts kicking some people out and whether he actually...
Are you doing your domestic politics
I thought I'd
section
squeeze it
in the climate section? Yeah,
There
because
we
we're going to come back to it. Yeah.
I think even with the RUC charges, it's worth noting that in terms of cost of living, the cost of implementing that using private companies, which would be the way probably that they would go about it, and having to charge that individually through all these other administrative tasks and, the whole agglomeration of it that they're planning to do with transaction costs and profits on those transaction costs added in, that is just straight on top, because at the moment what we do is very cheap. And so that just becomes an extra cost that goes into your daily cost of living total. So it's hardly going to, lessen the pressure that they're under.
Let me just ask, because one of our audience is asking this. So everything I've seen about the road user charge shift is that it isn't very sophisticated. Is there anything good about it? Is there anything good about a user pays process as opposed to the existing system?
I think one of the reasons that internationally there's a lot of movement towards this sort of system is because we're moving away, in theory, from fossil fuels and towards, electric vehicles and so on. And so you're actually losing your base of people that are paying anything towards maintaining the road system. And so it's kind of a thing that eventually you have to do. But seeing as we've slowed down the whole process of moving to electric vehicles, there aren't, so many on the roads here, and there's a big cost associated with doing this. I think, most of that benefit is moot. And as I said, if you really want to be fair about it, just charge it to the freight trucks and get the freight off the road.
Yeah, I mean, diesel would do the trick. Apart from anything else, there's the health problems with diesel. And you simply use the road user charge. There's no immediate alternative to diesel for these big, heavy trucks right now. They're not going to go electric in the next 10 years.
There's coastal shipping and there's rail, though, so you could stop the road damage, which is 99% of the road damage is them.
Yeah, you could use the existing road user charges, A, to get electric, which you've already done. And secondly, you could ramp up the true cost of the roads, not just the maintenance costs, but the capital costs, stick that into the road freight system, and then watch a few more shipping companies and rail usage go up. So,
level the playing field for freight transport is what.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Catherine, thank you so much for coming on. Great to see you again, and look forward to having you back next week.
Thanks.
Cheers.
And Robert, welcome after we gave you a spell last week. I'm afraid we'll still be talking about Gaza,
resting
at one point. Yes, resting. This is my resting face. And yes, I know in the bookshop there is a very poor internet connection to everybody, and I'll fix it next time. I hope. I apologize. Robert, we have this extraordinary meeting coming up, probably Saturday our time in Alaska, although as we both saw, Donald Trump described his meeting as being in Russia. So I think we've worked out that maybe the land swap is a little more adventurous than we thought, and he might actually give back Alaska or part of Alaska. What's your reading of this rather extraordinary meeting between two of the three members of our new tripolar world?
I don't think it's going to produce us. I do not think it's going to produce a serious outcome or a substantial outcome. I think it's been done at the initiative of Mr. Putin, who's extremely worried, couldn't emphasize it enough, about the prospect of the sort of sanctions that the Senate, 85 members of the Senate have agreed to, and Mr. Trump has to give the green light to, which would involve 500% tariffs, and they would target India and China, who are the two biggest markets for Russian oil exports. And given the state of the perilous state of the Russian economy, which is not getting a lot of coverage, GDP is stagnant. Basically, you've got inflation rising rapidly. and you've got the budget deficit rising by 30% in the last 12 months. It's not sustainable. And the senators, I don't usually agree with him, but Lindsey Graham described the imposition of this package, which is a bipartisan package, as being the sledgehammer blow to Russia's war effort. And so what will come out of it is very difficult to predict because, as we know, Mr. Trump is unpredictable. But it's interesting to me that Mr. Trump gave an extraordinary press conference yesterday where he once again said that Zelensky had started the war and that Ukraine has somehow miraculously invaded itself. And again, talking in riddles. But he's also coming under pressure, I think, some people in his own administration. The interesting thing is that Putin pushed for this summit in order to stave off the imposition of tariffs on his trading partners in particular. The interesting thing is that he has succeeded. Clearly, Mr. Putin has considerable leverage over Trump. It's quite clear. I know we had this conversation before, but it's worth just reiterating. Immediately after the election, on the 10th and the 12th of November, respectively, the Kremlin reminded Mr. Trump, firstly through their state media, where they showed explicit photographs of the First Lady, and secondly, on the 12th of November, an extraordinary message from one of the closest aides to Vladimir Putin, Nikolai Patrushev, former KGB, like Putin, saying to Mr. Trump, we helped you win the election. Now you must honor your obligations to us and forget, he didn't use the word forget, but he said basically your obligations to us exceed any concerns about fulfilling election pledges. We just don't know what the leverage is the Russians have on Mr. Trump, but I think Mr. Trump is doing everything possible to pacify Mr. Putin. That's probably why he agreed to the meeting. And of course, it plays into his vanity. He loves to be before the cameras and he wants to present himself as a peacemaker. But I'm not holding my breath about the outcome.
And Robert, Europe isn't there. Zelensky is not there. Europe and Zelensky had to have a specific
They're not there,
meeting.
but they made it quite clear. First of all, Mr. Trump has after the extraordinary press conference the other day, when he looked like it was recapturing the sort of narrative that Trump and J.D. Vance used in that awful meeting in the Oval Office back in February. But he subsequently backtracked. And now he said there'll be no territory will not be discussed. He's on a listening mission. So Mr. Putin's gone to Alaska to basically lay down his terms. Putin has said in the build-up there'll be no territorial concessions from Russia. And by the way, Ukraine won't be able to exercise its sovereignty in relation to putting in a request for NATO membership. So there's basically, I think, what's the purpose of this meeting? It's for Mr. Putin to restate his peace terms to the American president. He certainly, the invading force is showing no signs of giving up the fruits of its invasion.
Yeah, it was amusing that Trump described it as a feeling out visit, when I suspect it's actually a feeling up visit, as it were. With the other thing is they're going to meet, and a couple of people brought this up, that they are going to essentially meet together with their translators and nobody else.
Yes, again,
that must alarm you as a student of international, or a professor of international policy.
This is not the first time they've done this, by the way. They did it also in Helsinki, which caused enormous ructions in the State Department. Actually, there's a bigger worry. There's two big worries that you've pinpointed one of them, but there's a couple of other ones that we should mention just to get our viewers alarmed a bit more. There was meetings like this usually require weeks of preparation. This has been done at very short notice and on the fly. It's also been done on a false assumption, because Mr. Trump agreed to this meeting after getting briefed by Steve Witkoff, who returned from Moscow with following a 3-hour meeting with the Russian leader. He came away with the impression that Mr. Putin was prepared to make territorial concessions on Zaporizhia and Kherson. In fact, he got the wrong end of the stick through the translation. And it now appears, and the Russians actually were quite incensed about this. They made it quite clear within 24 hours that Witkoff had totally got it wrong, and that they're not in any way giving up any of the territories they've either partially or fully annexed. So this whole meeting, to some degree, Mr. Trump agreed to this before he knew that. So it's going to be very interesting. As I say, I think the Europeans have rallied quite significantly in the last week and probably been preparing for this moment where Mr. Trump will try to negotiate on behalf of Ukraine with Putin. They're not going to have a bar of it. Merz has made that very clear, and Zelensky has as well. So I can't really see this delivering very much.
But the pressure is on.
One of the things about, sorry, Bernard, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I wonder though. If
sorry, my connection is quite poor.
It's all right. I wonder though, Robert, if the domestic pressure is on in Europe, not just the economic slowdown, the way they were sort of beaten up on tariffs, not as bad as us, but beaten up on tariffs. And the most shocking thing for me in the last week actually was a new poll showing that the AfD is ahead as the most popular party in Germany at the moment, ahead of the governing party, which it just beggars belief. So I do wonder how much the Europeans can apply pressure when they're so weak domestically.
That's true. And there's no getting away from that. But, you know, when politicians are under pressure, there's two ways you can deal with that. You can try to compromise the forces which are getting the upper hand, or you can fight your way out of a difficult corner. And Merz may take the view that he's got to take the initiative and be seen as standing strong. You know, at the same time that's happening, the European rearmament is going on at a pace. And I think many Europeans have come to the view that if Putin isn't stopped, they'll be fighting. They could be confronting Putin once Ukraine has been swallowed. I don't think Ukraine will be swallowed. It's very interesting. There was a lot of attention, which I'm sure you guys picked up on, about sudden Russian advances of 15 kilometers. There was a lot of attention upon that yesterday in the Donetsk region. The last 12 hours, those gains were wiped out by the Azov. This is the group the Russians describe as Nazis. They killed over 150 Russian troops and basically seized a lot of equipment. So I think Putin is playing a weak hand well. He's clearly playing Trump at the moment. The question is, Mr. Trump has also made a pledge that if Putin isn't prepared for an immediate ceasefire, the Europeans have been quite subtle. They've praised Trump for his peacemaking efforts and said that the bottom line is nothing can be discussed until Putin agrees to a ceasefire. And that's a position that Zelensky has taken for a long time. So I don't think that Zelensky could politically survive if he gave in to Putin's demands. So I don't, you know.
Robert, what did you make of the West Bank analogy that has been said that Witkoff is supposedly suggesting that the way Israel governs the West Bank, having taken it back from Jordan in '67, could actually be a model for the way they do any land swaps? That did not seem fantastically encouraging to me, but Witkoff is the center of, you know, all of this.
Well, let's be quite clear.
Now,
no disrespect to Mr. Witkoff, but he hasn't had ideal preparation for dealing with two of the world's biggest hotspots, which is Gaza and the Ukraine, and he's hopeless yet of his depth. And he's been, you know, this is the price that Trump has paid for having cronies. This is always the perfect storm waiting to happen, and it's now playing out. You've got loyalists who haven't had sufficient preparation for doing high-level jobs. Their only qualification is their ability to constantly say yes to the boss. But that's unraveling for the boss. And from Mr. Putin has been the winner so far. He got the delay of the sanctions that he was dreading, and he's already lining up a meeting apparently in Russia with Mr. Trump, and he will continue to try and play for time. This is what it's all about, and it's trying to keep the pressure off. But I don't think the military situation is altogether bad. Ukraine constantly, and he's done it, hit Volgograd in the last 12 hours, is every night hitting Russian infrastructure. And although Putin is not going to advertise it from the rooftops, that is another big worry. The economy is standing still, and strategic sites are getting hit by drones quite repeatedly. Now, that's no consolation, of course, to Ukraine. They're taking heavy casualties, as are the Russians. But as I say, I do think of the two leaders, strangely enough, and it's not the international narrative, I think Putin may be the one who's really under pressure. There's also been some rumors of coup attempts, although I haven't seen anything concrete to back that up.
No, I haven't seen until we have Mark Galeotti, whose podcast I listened to in Moscow's Shadow is always fantastic, and he's a bit of a nutter. Until he says that there is a genuine coup attempt, I'm not going to believe it. But Bernard was rather hoping that my introducing the idea of governing parts of Ukraine like the West Bank was in fact a segue, and of course, amusingly, he was using the spelling for the scooter Segway as opposed to the Spanish word segue. But
autocorrect.
Segueing to Gaza and to. I guess I had a little rant at the top of the hour about the assassination of what is now, in fact, the entire remaining bureau of Al Jazeera in Gaza.
What an appalling act that was.
Correct. That's exactly what we said. And the other thing I had a little rant about, Robert, was about the whataboutism about this, the attempts to besmirch their reputation in after death. Robert, what do you think about this New Zealand response to this? Because I think that's we know what's going on there. We need we've had this Winston Peters thing about potentially doing it in September. What's your view? I mean, I can't help feeling that he is in fact vaguely sensible about this, but what's your view?
No, I disagree. I think we're not showing the moral clarity and the strategic urgency that we need to show. I think Helen Clark has been pretty accurate in her assessment. And by the way, the fact that Helen Clark and Mary Robertson went to the Rafah crossing showed, I think, the lack of empathy and the political cowardice that most liberal democracies have shown during the last 22 months. This problem hasn't just manifested because Palestinians are becoming hungry through an illegal blockade of food. I think New Zealand, in a sense, this is the thing I find frustrating about the New Zealand position. Our listeners and viewers will know that New Zealand actually broke with the Five Eyes and was one of the first countries, along with Ireland, to call for an immediate ceasefire. And we opposed US use of the veto in the UN, and we wanted to see. We repeated that position. We repeated that we didn't want any restrictions of humanitarian aid, and we repeated the need for a two-state solution. We then signed a statement with 30 countries reiterating all these points, except there was something different. We said 2 weeks ago that if Mr. Netanyahu's government doesn't respond, quote, further action will follow. And then the government, then some of the parties which were laggards compared with New Zealand in the UN decide to go ahead, Canada, Australia, and say that they will go ahead and, in principle, having had assurances from the Palestinian Authority, would go ahead with their plans to recognize Palestine. We said, this is a very complicated situation. We've got to go back to the drawing board on this one, reconsider it, take soundings. But then there was another development which may be changing the situation again. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was very candid. He was asked about the situation in Gaza, and he said it was a truly appalling situation. And he said Netanyahu had lost the plot. Well, actually, we all know what he meant, but probably what he was really saying is we have belatedly discovered that Mr. Netanyahu's plot is not the same as ours. He doesn't want a two-state solution. And I think that realization is dawning, not only in New Zealand, but elsewhere. The question is, we need to actually, what will impress Israel is not statements, but actually actions. One action is to recognize the Palestinian state, because it would formalize international opposition to what are the clear plans of the current government of Israel to take control of Gaza and annex the West Bank in 2025. Now, it's important to do that. But there's other actions the government of New Zealand could take, hopefully in conjunction with other governments. What sort of actions? Well,
Bernard,
sanctions.
Go ahead, because I want to ask him. I want to ask Robert a domestic question too. But you go ahead, Bernard, please.
Sanctions and possibly curtailing of diplomatic representation. Some people have suggested telling the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, to go home for a while. But there are things that New Zealand could do that will go beyond statements. And I think it's important. We've got to the point now. This has been going on 22 months. We need to indicate to the Israeli public, many of whom have little time for Netanyahu, that this is not acceptable, what is going on. And words, there are limits to keep making statements.
Robert, it was interesting to see the lost the plot thing, although you'd have to say that Netanyahu had a plot and he's still on it. That's the problem. The comment also sort of highlighted the weakness of Christopher Luxon. It seems that he's not going ahead with joining up with Australia and the UK and others, because one of his own parties, the one of this tails that wags his dog, does seem to be opposed to it. And when you hear Simon Court in Parliament, it's pretty clear ACT are hardcore on this. So what do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I think ACT take the view, which is reflects the official Netanyahu position, that if you recognize the Palestinian state, you're rewarding Hamas. What they don't say is that if you illegally occupy the territories of Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank, and this is according to the International Court of Justice, which describes those territories as unlawfully occupied. And by the way, we voted for that in the UN General Assembly. So we take that position. And if you deny those people living under occupation any peaceful path to political self-determination, then you predictably generate forces like Hamas, which are going to use violence, terrorism. So, that view that ACT have can certainly be challenged. But you're absolutely right, Bernard. I think Mr. Luxon, there's two ways of interpreting his statement yesterday. You could say, he made that statement, but nothing is going to happen. Or he's been under pressure within national ranks.
Yes.
It's no secret that national supporters are not happy about the fact that Mr. Luxon may be seen as a bit too accommodating with the likes of New Zealand First and the ACT Party. Maybe,
but do you think? But presumably, ACT, not to bring you too much into Bernard's domestic section and rantogram in a minute, but presumably, we have a couple of people on the site on the YouTube feed talking about the usual current Israeli talking points about all this, and I would argue that the two-state solution is in fact dead, although it's been brought a lot further by all of this. But ACT presumably thinks it's picking up on a winner, on something it's getting.
No, I couldn't agree more, Peter. I think that ACT and New Zealand First appeal, their political appeal is not to the whole of the population, but it's to relatively small segments of the population, maybe 8 to 15%, who basically are pro-Trump. They are anti-woke. And so both of those parties are very loath to take a position which Mr. Trump could criticize, because it could have implications for their domestic support. I think Mr. Luxon is a completely different position. I think he has to respond to currents in the center of politics, and certainly on the right, not the far right, but on the right, which are completely unhappy with the fact the situation in Gaza is getting worse and worse.
Yeah, Bernard and I are doing our usual semaphore so that I can just do a last question to you, because a couple of people are asking in the thing where the historical perspective that we were going to talk to came back. We did just zoom on because we went slightly long with Catherine, although people are bitching about not having enough of that as well, which is fair enough because she is brilliant. Let's talk about very quickly Yalta, the Yalta Conference of 1945 that Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill divided up the rest of the world, led to the Iron Curtain, led to the Russian occupation of the Comecon countries. Isn't this what's going to happen tomorrow? And then,
No.
Quick second one, because we're
no,
going to blend
because
the two.
this is
If
you want to draw a historical parallel, and I love history, but if you want to draw a historical parallel, it's with the Munich conference involving Neville Chamberlain, where bigger countries decide they can negotiate away the interests of smaller ones. But the world is completely different in 2025 than 1945. One of the reasons Russia and America, or the Soviet Russia and the United States, could largely divide Europe up is because they were the winners of the Second World War. Europe was devastated. So you had two emerging superpowers who glowered at each other across a devastated Europe, and Britain was in sharp decline because although it nominally won in the Second World War, it was basically spent as a force because it was bankrupt after the Second World War. So I think the situation is completely different in the 2025 because superpowers have much less autonomy in 2025 than they did in 1945. Today, there's many problems that superpowers cannot fix.
You always say that, Robert, and I think we need to have a session on whether that's true. I'm dying to get somebody. I'm dying to get somebody in from the UN to talk about that because
but could I
know
just a
your
quick plug here?
Approach.
Could I please thank one of our subscribers, Ian Cave, who kindly sent me a YouTube video before today's session. Thank you, Ian. That was very helpful. And he alerted me to Mr. Trump's press conference yesterday.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thanks
Robert.
so much. So let's do the Sykes-Picot agreement next week.
In 3 minutes.
Sure. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Robert. We'd like to welcome into the show for the first time Steph Honey, who is a trade policy expert, a former trade diplomat with MFAT, and we're very grateful to have you on the show, Steph. Welcome in.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming on, Steph.
It's been a fascinating time in trade policy. All of the things we thought we knew are being turned upside down. What did you make of what we've seen in the last couple of weeks alone with Donald Trump, the 15% rate for New Zealand, the punishment of India, the punishment of Brazil, the suggestion of a 500% tariff on Russia? What do you make of it as someone who's been doing this stuff, for 20 years?
Well, that's a great place to start because, of course, as you rightly say, this is uncharted territory. Really, a lot of the orthodoxies of trade that when I had my start as a baby trade negotiator, have really been turned on their heads in the last sort of 6 months or so, but particularly the last few weeks, as you say. I mean, I think from a sort of systemic perspective, first of all, really this just goes to underscore one of the kind of the themes of the Trump administration's trade policy so far, which is uncertainty. We're seeing unprecedented levels of sort of unpredictability, these kind of erratic sort of policy changes, happening at sort of at lightning speed. I mean, I've been to lots of trade conferences this year where people have made the joke that, please text, or let me know if the tariff policy changes while I'm speaking, and trade has traditionally been a fairly glacial business. You can come back to a negotiation a few years later and find that things haven't moved on too far. So that's really unprecedented and unusual. And I think, a lot of countries, including New Zealand, have struggled to be geared up to keep up with that pace and anticipate, in a good strategic way to anticipate how to play things. But I guess the other really significant thing that you've alighted on there is these other non-trade concerns being brought into trade. Now, I mean, it's obviously rather naive to think that trade's been in its own little world and it's been divorced from broader, political influences. That's definitely not the case. But I think something that we're seeing really significantly now is that a lot of these decisions that President Trump is making about which tariffs to apply on which trading partner are very explicitly being driven by things that are nothing to do with trade. I mean, initially the tariffs had a certain internal logic, not one that I agree with, but there was at least a sort of an economic rationale, which was this very strong focus on perceptions from President Trump that where there was a trade deficit, it showed in his mind that the US was being taken advantage of, and that unfair situation needed to be adjusted.
I wish someone would explain to him the privilege of the US dollar and the fact that the US has had its investing and spending for the last 20 years paid for by foreign capital. But anyway, sorry.
Absolutely. But, beyond that, Bernard, it's also the logic of it. I mean, I'm not worried about running a deficit with the supermarket because, I'm actually benefiting from the things I'm purchasing and consuming. So, you can apply that lens to it as well. But I think we're now in even more uncharted territory because it's very clear that President Trump, he loves tariffs. He describes them as sort of the most beautiful word in the English language, tariff. And he sees them as kind of a Swiss Army knife. I've seen that term used in a few media pieces. It's the multi-purpose tool that you can use to achieve a whole range of not just economic objectives, but also political ones or sort of security ones. So, as you mentioned, these tariffs on India, which are apparently to do with India's purchases of Russian oil. We've seen lots of other sort of political factors bleeding in, the tariff that President Trump,
the Bolsonaro one,
for Bolsonaro's release from prison and so on. And that's not normal or not, has not been the standard trade policy arsenal, if you like, certainly for a lot of the last 30 years of trade policy anyway.
So how do we deal with this? Do we hope it goes away? Do we adopt a different strategy? Do we look to see how people did it in the 1920s and 30s? Do we just hide in a hole and just hope that his heart gives out, or what?
Lots of good options on the table there, Bernard, but I'm not sure that any of them is quite hitting the nail on the head. I mean, I think there's definitely a case for sort of a very clear-eyed strategic assessment. I think, as I said before, a lot of this is very much grounded in uncertainty. Even the countries that might have got deals, as one commentator, Deborah Elms at the Heinrich Foundation, has described them, napkin deals. You can jot the details down on the back of a napkin.
With a Sharpie.
Exactly. Even those countries are not absolutely confident that they will stick. They are not clear, both sides, about what exactly is in them. So, the case for rushing in to try to do some sort of deal, I would say, of course, New Zealand is doing the right thing. We've got our most senior trade negotiator over there right now. The ministers, I understand, going to be going there as well. So, of course, we should be talking to the US and seeing if there is some way that we can just make all of this go away. If there's, we can go over there and hear what they have to say and see what's needed. Although it has become very clear that, in fact, it comes back to this issue around, is there a surplus or a deficit in trade? Unfortunately for us, we've got a very small, sort of surplus going to the US. And so that's why our 10% tariff appears to have gone up to 15. But, of course, we should try to fix things in the short term. And I think credit to the government, they've actually played it very strategically and very well so far, including in the last week. But, where do we take it beyond the immediate? Because if you think about where is New Zealand placed in this, we're not the EU, we're not China, we're not one of the large economies that could perhaps, the US punches us, we can punch back. We're a very small, very open economy. We don't have a lot of, tariffs that we can offer up and other sort of retaliation that we could threaten the US with. So we've actually got to be smart and agile. And I mean, luckily for us, that has had to be our modus operandi, for forever. We've always had a very difficult set of cards to play. the world has always been a pretty unfriendly place for us. We've always needed to be smart about the way we do what we do. I mean, we've got fantastic products, we've got an amazing offer, but we also have to be smart about it. So I think, in a way, it's not a great situation, but actually we probably, better than many countries, have got the skill set that we need to try to deal with this. We've also got this huge advantage of generations of trade negotiators and ministers and governments in negotiating this fantastic portfolio of trade deals, not napkin deals, actual legally binding trade agreements, including being part of some of the sort of the biggest, sweeping shares of global GDP trade deals, mostly very high quality with important trading partners. Almost all of our trade is covered by a trade agreement. So we're actually in a really great strategic position for this next stage, bearing in mind that it's a pretty terrible, chaotic world out there. And there's been a lot of talk about how we need to thicken up and leverage those rules-based agreements, because as a small state, we need the rules, we need everybody to abide by them. And we're lucky that we have this portfolio of trade deals. And, the government's not sitting on its hands. We're negotiating with India. We've just ticked off UAE and GCC. We did very high quality deals with the EU and the UK sort of a year or two ago. So, in terms of that part of the strategy, I think, we're doing very well. But we can't rest on those laurels. We've got to be creative about where we take that.
Peter, you've got a question. Yep.
Yeah, I have. Sorry, my reception here is not as good as it should be. Are there times when I was watching an interview the other day with Navarro, the US economist who really is the progenitor of this. Are there times when you think actually everything you've learnt and put into place over the last 30 years is wrong, and that there is actually a logic to this and it's going to stick? Like, our world is being turned upside down by Howard Lutnick, Navarro, and Trump. Is it possible that they're right?
In a nutshell, Peter, no, I don't think so. And I think, I would say that because I'm a trade expert from a very small economy, a very open economy. And for a country like New Zealand, there's no universe in which a might makes right world is going to be good for us. I mean, there's this sort of great little saying that does the rounds from time to time. When the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And, we're the grass in that scenario. So the world that existed before we had the World Trade Organization and this sort of global multilateral rules-based trading system was not a very comfortable place for a little country like New Zealand. I mean, we can't bring out the gunboats. We can't threaten to retaliate. We can't, bully other countries into doing what we want. And so for a country like New Zealand, the sort of core precepts of the rules-based trading system are so fundamental to our prosperity, our well-being, the inclusion of, Māori in the economy, to creating jobs. I mean, trade's worth, or sort of, you can account for about a quarter of all jobs in New Zealand are sort of linked to trade. So there's no world in which a sort of chaotic landscape without the rules, where people are applying these kind of slightly, arguably not correct sort of economic precepts, is a good one.
So it's just, Steph, so it's no good for anybody. Is that what you're saying? Ultimately, it's no good for anybody. It's a bonkers strategy. Is that right?
And the United States has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the global rules-based trading system since its inception.
Steph, just it occurred to me that we've sort of been here before, back in the late 60s when Britain decided to join the EU. Oh boy. And we had to scramble to, find new markets, and eventually we did. And we're not very reliant on the UK anymore at all. If this carries on, is there a lot we can do to really cozy up, if you like, to everyone else? If the Americans are going to be silly about it. How about we, bring the EU into the CPTPP, or heaven forbid, ask the Chinese to join it? Can we do stuff like that?
Absolutely. And I think that is clearly, an idea whose time has come. I mean, it's been sort of floating around the scene for a while, but it's something that Prime Minister Luxon has talked about with the head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen. There's, I think, the Prime Minister has been sort of gone on record as saying that they're hoping that there will be a meeting between the CPTPP, these Pacific Rim countries, and the EU before the year's end. There's also a dialogue that, to use the sort of term of art, another one of these dialogues that is being set up with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And I mean, to me, that's the smart play here, because, the best revenge is looking good. Okay, maybe the US is wanting to deal itself out of that kind of trade sort of conversation right now, but we have a lot of other great relationships that we can thicken up, we can do creative things with. So I think that idea of sort of building up those relationships is really positive. And in fact, it's a strategy that New Zealand's already been using for some years, this concept of, sorry for the jargon, but concerted open plurilateralism, where we get together with groups of countries that have the same sort of aspirations that we do, the same, let's say, values in terms of what kind of trading environment we want to see. And so we've, in the last few years, been negotiating a lot of these little open plurilaterals with a view to them being a building block for bigger.
Yeah, that's very much the Robert Patman view and which both of these worlds are being turned upside down, it seems, at the moment.
That's right.
The multilateral world,
There's no point for us in just sitting here wringing our hands and, to use one of your options, Bernard, just, crawling under the duvet and hoping it all goes away. I mean, we don't have that luxury. We've got to be smart about it, but we're well placed. And I think, the other thing that gives me optimism is that we've also been trying to build out these sort of little agreements in areas that are so critical to New Zealand's future. So things like digital trade. We've got an agreement called the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, which is now, the sort of the FOMO theory of trade policy. We've got lots of other countries wanting to join that. It started small, but it's really snowballing. We've got one in the sustainability space because, of course, climate change. I mean, if we think Trump is a trade disruption, we haven't seen anything, when those climate impacts start to really bite. So, I mean, we're doing all of that. But having said that, I mean, that's at the level of governments and strategic positioning. That's critical. But what does it mean for businesses? And I mean, that's a much more difficult conversation. Business is in the business of solving problems. They are agile, they're smart. And if COVID's taught us anything, it's the importance of sort of hedging, maybe shifting away from a sort of a just-in-time model to a just-in-case model. But we're going to need that in spades for the period ahead, very clearly. I mean, businesses are going to have to build in some of these factors around, okay, well, what's the geostrategic or geoeconomic landscape? What's my hedge? What's my diversification option? And those things are very easy to say, but they're quite challenging to do. I mean, particularly if you're in a branded business or even in the sort of commodity side of things, pivoting to another market does take time. You've got to build up the relationships with distribution networks and partners and so on. It's a complicated exercise, but it can be done. As you rightly say, Bernard, we learned that in the 1970s.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking of 747s with Rolls-Royce engines in them when Rob Muldoon said people like to look out and see Rolls-Royce, when it was particularly, of course, to get another 56,000 tons, I think it was, of butter into the EU, but into the UK. Bernard.
And if only we could talk to those trade negotiators in their graves and tell them about Brexit and watch them turn several times. Anyway, Steph, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on to the Hoon here on the Kaka. Ngā mihi nui.
Thank you, Steph.
Peter, we have blown our time. And,
yeah, Bernard, I suspect some of those trade negotiators are still alive, actually, because mind you, I was a child then, so it doesn't matter.
I did interview one
immediately
after Brexit, and he was very diplomatic.
as they all are. So quick skateboarding dog, which is actually a rather sad one, and it was one I didn't get to do last week because we did your Cybertruck one, which was that, and I must check out where this has got to for next week, which is that French authorities are pursuing a man who lit a cigarette on the eternal flame of the tomb of the unknown soldier underneath the Arc de Triomphe, which is probably the most crass and vulgar thing you could do.
It's quite a French thing,
it was
though.
Rather,
to smoke.
No, I think it may well have. It could have. Yes. It was a Gaulois. No, I don't think it was a Gaulois, but it was possibly somebody from Estonia, it seems. And the Minister for Veterans and Remembrance said this flame does not light a cigarette. It burns for the sacrifice of millions of our soldiers, which of course is true. So it's not as bright as our often usual skateboarding dog. So thank you, Bernard, and thanks to Simon. And sorry for all of you guys who suffered along on YouTube.
No, we've had a great show. Thank you very much, Peter Bale. I am Bernard Hickey for the Kaka. See you next week. Ka kite anō.
See you, Bernard. See you, everybody.